Edmund Arroyo is a licensed clinical social worker and licensed school social worker. He's the founder of the Heartspeak Institute, which is an organization that provides counseling and education to individuals, couples, and families. He employs cognitive behavioral therapy within the framework of systems theory when working with his clients. As a result of his extensive experience counseling families and couples in the Muslim community, Mr. Arroyo has been asked to present on marriage and family issues and at numerous conferences. He has presented on matters of faith and marriage at the annual ISNA conference in Chicago, 3 separate occasions, and Mr. Arroyo co-taught the dynamics of marriage in Muslim America for the Nawawi Foundation with Dr. Omar Farooq Abdullah. He participated in teaching at the Zaytuna Minara Conference on Marriage in Chicago in June of 2008, and he's conducted workshops in Rockford, Champaign, and various suburban communities neighboring Chicago. We're really honored to have somebody with such an impressive professional background also to share in and complement the discussions that we're having today, as Edmund will be discussing how mental health is related to trauma and understanding trauma and seeking assistance. So welcome, Edmund. Thank you.
Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum. Just want to touch briefly on Sister Yvonne, Saruhi, Jazakallah khair for both of your words. Some of the things that I reflected on in listening to them. One of the things that Sister Yvonne talked about is that conversation with her aunt that helped her kind of have some self-reflection. And in Islam, one of the closest words we have to self-reflection is ihsan, this concept of looking within yourself and how you can work on yourself, improve yourself. And I think when it comes to mental health, that's one of the starting places. And so it was excellent that she started with that. And then Ruhi is talking about having trust in Allah. And this is definitely a major component. Spirituality within our faith, it can be very powerful, and it can help us get through a lot of things. A couple stories, one story that I'll share with you that was kind of a moving story for me that somebody told once was of, I believe it was Arthur Ashe, a famous tennis player, who contracted AIDS through a blood transfusion. And when one of his fans, a child, asked him, do you ever wonder why me, right? Why me? Why did this happen to me? And one of the things that he said was, when I was winning championships, when I was winning all those titles, I never asked, why me? But now that something bad has happened, for me to ask why me, that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate. And I want you to reflect on that for a minute, in that we have, alhamdulillah, wonderful lives in so many different aspects. And very seldom do we say, why me? When it comes to that raise we get at work, or the new house we get, or when we have a child, we say, alhamdulillah, we don't ever ask, why me? Why do I deserve this? We just almost live our lives, and this includes myself, as if I earned it, not being conscious that everything comes from Allah. And so, the other thing along those lines as well is one of our scholars, Ibn Ata'Allah, in one of his wisdoms, he says that in reference to how we all go through times of spirituality where it's easy to pray, you get up, it's easy, there's not much, it doesn't take a whole lot of energy. And then there are other times where it just, you're exhausted, you don't feel like praying Asr, you want to just lay on the couch and watch a little bit more TV, and it takes all of your energy to do it. And then you pray, and you don't really feel like you're getting anything out of it. You even forget how many rakat you prayed. And so, one of the things that he says about this, he says that there are times when you pray and you get a lot out of it, and you feel this connection. When you do sujood, you can feel like you're connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then, there are other times that you don't. But if you only do it when you feel the connection, when you're feeling good, when you're not exhausted, then who are you doing it for to begin with? Are you just doing it for yourself, for when you get something out of it? Or are you praying because it's Allah's right on you? Right? So something to reflect on, that when we're really feeling depressed or feeling down, sometimes that's, as was referenced, is our test to turn to the one who can address our issues the most. Having said that, across this nation, there's this sweeping trend in psychology called mindfulness. It's on Newsweek magazine covers and all over different discourses in this country. Mindfulness and yoga are two things that have really caught fire in this country. And sometimes now, some places are trying to combine the two, like new businesses are opening up. Now, I have a theory about that. One of them is that people are moving away from spirituality and from religion, so they're still looking for some kind of way to calm themselves, some kind of way to feel spiritual. And I can't touch this podium because every time I touch it, it shakes his mic and it turns it off. So what we're having is this concept of mindfulness. If we think about it, it's very heavily, this topic is covered within our faith, which is not called mindfulness. Just this idea of seeing Allah in creation. So there's this mindfulness cartoon that has this picture of a man walking his dog, and it shows a bubble above the man's head, and it shows all these things he's thinking about: money, his house, his family, his job, and all these pictures of different things he's worried about. And it shows a bubble above the dog's head, and all you see above his head is the landscape that's in front of them. So the idea being that that's all he's thinking about is what he sees in front of him and appreciating that, but the man is walking and is oblivious to that because he's all caught up in his head. So building on this concept of ihsan and kind of mindfulness in general, and remembrance, dhikr of Allah, is one of the things where we start talking about prevention of mental illness, and how we can be conscious of how we live our lives in healthy ways. So there's a reality, and that is that we call it mental illness for a reason. Even when it comes to addiction, they call it for recovery the addiction model, the illness model, meaning that we can't treat psychological mental illness as a moral dilemma. If we tell somebody that's depressed, you're not being grateful to Allah, that doesn't help. There is such a thing as clinical depression. Unfortunately, in a lot of places around the world where there's a lot of poverty, mental health treatment is a luxury that we have in this country. In a lot of other countries, people just get literally put in buildings, hospitals for the rest of their lives, discarded by society. And I just saw something recently about Indonesia and some of the places there where these people are stored, and they just get worse. As someone who works in a high school, I often see the emergence of mental illness in teenagers. Some of it is just the blues and struggling teenage angst, but some of it is definite, clear chemical imbalance. And we see it in our community, and it saddens me in our community because unfortunately, our community sometimes doesn't take it seriously. And I want to go back to that concept of why me? Because I think that's what happens in our community, is that when it's my son or my daughter that has mental illness, it's easy for me to deny it and act as if it's something wrong with their character than to try to own it and really try to treat this mental illness. And I tell people all the time, you either invest now when your child is 14 years old, or you will pay later. You will pay in their adulthood, you will pay your whole life for their instability because you felt like it was inconvenient for you to stop your life for a year and treat their mental illness. So when it comes to trauma, we got to understand that we all have different traumatic experiences in our life. One of the trends in mental health is also trauma-informed care. That means that, and actually I heard someone say, trauma is everything. I do a lot of marriage counseling, and one of the first things I do with couples is I ask them about their trauma. And I say, every single one of these things will reveal itself in your marriage. Every one. And then you got to figure out how it's affecting you and then how to navigate that in marriage. So trauma, what is it? It can be anything small, not that it's small, I mean trauma isn't necessarily small, but some of the lesser trauma, like being teased in grade school because, you're Muslim, because you are skinny or overweight or whatever grade schoolers want to tease you about, to more serious trauma like abuse, assault, war trauma. This is our reality. We have Muslims immigrating to this country from around the world that are going to be struggling from poverty, from war, and it affects them and their lives. Now, one of the things that they're finding in research now about trauma is there's this concept, this new field in research called epigenetics. This is absolutely fascinating because what they're saying is you can inherit trauma from your grandparents. That genetically we pass on trauma. So they've done research on generations of people who struggled in famine, who struggled in war, and their grandchildren are more likely to be overweight, depressed, and all these other things. And so you owe it to your grandchildren to treat mental illness in your family because it can be passed on. The way epigenetics works is this. One of the studies they did was on rats. And it's a certain rat that once it's under a lot of stress, its fur turns yellow. And so what they did was they mated these two rats who had yellow fur because they'd been through all kinds of stress, and rat stress could include not feeding them for long periods of time, working them too much, agitating them. And what they found is those two rats gave birth to yellow rats. SubhanAllah. It changed. Basically, you're talking about a gene that expressed that gene, and now that gene becomes expressed in the next generation. But there's always a cure. And what they found is if they take that next generation of rats and they give it a very comfortable life and they feed it healthy foods and they nurture it and give it a lot of care, it gives birth to brown-haired babies. So we need to think about that when it comes to our genetics and what we can. So when we talk about things like severe mental illness, like bipolar or schizophrenia, we need to think about the fact that if my father or my mother was schizophrenic or bipolar, I have it within my capacity to do that. It's in my genetic makeup. But it all depends on how I live my life and how I teach my children to live their life that determines whether or not that gene expresses itself. And this is why we have a higher rate of mental illness in a lot of high crime, high poverty areas. A lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, all of these things. And they keep getting passed on because there's a lack of education about it and a lack of treatment. So I want you to think about that when it comes to, let me just kind of ignore this, because then you may be also paying for your grandchildren's mental health because you felt it wasn't necessary. Now, a couple concepts that we have within Islam, within the whole development of Sharia, for example, and how Sharia law is determined. There are two main concepts. One of them is harm shall be removed. That was already mentioned, right? Harm shall be removed. So we need to think that, if there's harm, we have this responsibility to address it. Muslim, may Allah reward all of the people who organize and are involved in this organization tenfold, because that's exactly what their mission is to remove harm from people who are dealing with challenges in society. I mean, that's not what it says on their website, but generally that's what their mission is. The other concept that I want to mention is, also one of the aims of Sharia law is to preserve the intellect. Right? So how do we do things in our society that help us stay healthy in our mental health. Help us stay healthy in how we live our lives. And really trying to have a consciousness of that. Because when it comes to all the things that were mentioned today, a society that's looking for some kind of spirituality, and Sister Ruhi talked about the importance of having that in your life and that connection to your children, right? And when you start teaching that to your children at a young age, they start thinking about these things. One of the things I found very fascinating working with the Muslim community when it comes to addiction, for example. So if you don't teach them how to cope with stress, there's two concepts that we've heard in the last 10, 15 years. We've heard helicopter parents who are always like trying to manage everything for their kids' lives. We have the high school parents who apply for all their kids' college, and so the kid will come to guidance counselor, and guidance counselor will say, did you do this for, University of Illinois? And they'll say, I don't know, my mom filled it out, right? And then you have bulldozer parents, which tries to remove any obstacles at all from your kids' lives. And what that does, it helps them, or it prevents them from ever developing resilience, which is one of the biggest necessary things for success, is your resilience and be able to overcome obstacles. So when it comes to, as a society, and how we parent and how we manage our kids' lives, we need to really take that into consideration, and that we're actually helping them through and giving them some sort of spirituality. Because one of the main reasons why people turn to things like addiction, which include pornography, alcohol, drugs, and video games, all these other things that kids use, what they do is they use them to avoid emotion. So what I'm going to do is, I'm feeling really frustrated, really angry, but if I go do this one thing, all of a sudden I don't feel that anymore, right? But if I've been, if my parents have shared ways for me to get through this spiritually, and they've talked with me about this, that's one more thing. One of the reasons, what's the number one reason why people a lot of times, when they contemplate suicide, they don't do it? Because they're afraid of hell, right? So that means the parents have had a conversation of, Allah, or in Christianity, God will not be happy with you. There's a consequence for this. But even take it a little bit further when it comes to spirituality, in that time of desperation, you don't feel alone because you have dhikr. You remember Allah. It requires you to remember Him. So when it comes to mental health and when it comes to treatment, the way I want you to really think about it is any other health problem. And that if you wake up one morning and your knee's really hurting you, you might just kind of tough it out through the day, and you might just keep walking and going about your day. You wake up the next day and it still hurts, and maybe a little bit more. You might still keep going with it. After a couple of weeks of that, and if it hurts even more, you go see a doctor. We don't hesitate. Or you ask your sister who's a doctor, or whoever. You consult someone. And then if they don't know the answer, you take it a step further. Maybe you get x-rays, especially if it's getting worse. But for some reason, because of this stigma of mental illness in our community, people just kind of, just pray to Allah and it will get better, or whatever else. When you see it not getting better, you need to do something about it. Because otherwise it's like cancer. You can't really see it, but it's growing. And it doesn't just go away. It doesn't just go away. And so we need to realize that we need to understand it from an illness model, and we need to address it when it comes. And we have, alhamdulillah, a lot more Muslim mental health professionals now than even when I started 12, 15 years ago. And there's one up in this area. There are a lot of different ones, but you don't even have to go to a Muslim. Go to somebody. I know sometimes you don't want to run into another Muslim there. That's fine, whatever. But I always get clients that I tell them, I try to be very confidential to make sure that they don't even run into anybody. And they say, I don't care. I want them to know that I'm getting help. More people need to get help. And I say, yes, but not everybody feels that way. It might be their first time. They get really uncomfortable. And I want them to keep coming. So you can't have that stigma. And if you're worried about somebody in your family, one of the best ways to help them get help is to say, I'd like for us to go and figure out how we can work through this, instead of you need help, right? And somebody's going to fix you. Because most of the times it's not just one person. you do have chemical imbalances, which need to often be treated very aggressively, very quickly, especially some of the extreme ones like bipolar and schizophrenia, because they don't go away. They don't go away. But I've, alhamdulillah, seen people diagnosed with those illnesses and function 95% of what they ever were if it's properly treated, and to the point where they go on and have happy lives. Now, I just want to say one more thing, and I'll wrap it up, and that is that the experiences that were shared, I can't remember who it was, about, it was Sister Yvonne, about how the Muslims who have mental illness and have to take medication, they can't fast during Ramadan. You don't realize the sweetness of that fast and breaking that fast until you deal with a client who is crying because they can't fast. And they can't do that because they have to take medicine every day. So this Ramadan, think about that. Think about the fact that sometimes we get frustrated that we have to fast and we have to get up so early and, whoa, these are the longest fasts and these are the longest days of the year. And that person's wishing that they could fast and taste that sweetness of that first drink of water. Take that with you. Support this organization. It's a beautiful one. Assalamu alaikum.
Wonderful points for us to all reflect on, Edmund. Thank you so much. And that is one thing. Muhsen is not here to counsel. We are not professionals in the field. We are simply connectors and liaisons. I was just telling Brother Edmund when he arrived that we have had people reach out to us who have been on the verge of suicide. And immediately, all our team can do is connect them to the proper resources, and somehow multiple people have reached out and said, we felt comfortable coming to you, coming to this organization. We felt it was judgment-free. And may Allah bless the efforts and our founder and our board, mashallah, Sheikh Omar Suleiman, Mufti Kamani, and everybody on our team who's involved, because it will make a difference in people's lives if they feel that they can talk about these issues. So please know, just anybody you know who's struggling, just put them in touch with us. There's a lot of information in the back about how to reach Muhsen,